Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. Chuck Failla is an industry advocate for the RIA space. In addition to founding Sovereign Financial, one of the country's fastest growing RIA platforms, he is also the host of the investment news podcast, Go RIA. Go RIA is a media outlet 100% dedicated to helping financial advisors go independent in the RIA space. Chuck, welcome to the podcast.
Corey, thanks very much. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, listen, I'm excited. Certainly half of your bio wouldn't be true for me, but the half that talks about being an advocate for the RIA space and helping people go independent and whatever is a big part of what I do from a different aspect of it. So we have that in common, and just, being in the space for as many decades as we have, I'm really interested to talk to you about it. So, but before we get into all that, we get into the deal angles and we get into what Sovereign's doing and everything else in your experience, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. Because I'm assuming, running a wealth management firm and being a podcast host and being an advocate for independence in the RIA space wasn't on your radar back then, but you tell me.
You would be surprised.
Okay.
And it's really funny that you say that. It honestly is, because we didn't talk about this offline at all.
No.
So here's the story, and this is absolutely true. From a very young age, like a strangely young age, like 9 or 10. No, it was a single digit. It was like 8 or 9. Like you said, it was very, very odd that you mentioned this. All I ever wanted to be was a business owner.
Wow.
Didn't want to be a rock star.
Yeah.
Didn't want to be, a star basketball player, which, sidebar, is fortunate because I have neither music talent nor athletic talent at all. But from a very, very young age, literally single digit, I wanted nothing else other than to have my own business.
Wow. Now I have to add, I have to do a follow-up question on that. Do you have any idea where that came from? Did you come from entrepreneurial parents or what's the DNA of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've asked myself that question quite a bit because it's weird. As I say, from that very young age, all I wanted is to have my own business. And the best I could figure is this, if I'm playing sort of Monday morning psychoanalyst, yeah?
Yeah.
So I grew up in a first generation, Italian-American family. Parents were off the boat and very hardworking folks, as many, many immigrants are.
Sure.
And my father was in the Merchant Marines, right? Mm-hmm. And so he was away a lot, 2 months at a time on the oil tankers. He was on the Gulf oil tanker. He was a radio officer. For you maritime aficionados, his 15 minutes of fame was that he was the radio officer that captured the SOS for the Andrea Doria, which is a very famous shipwreck off the coast of Massachusetts.
Wow.
Yep. So if you Google his name, which is similar to mine, Failla, there's not too many Faillas around. At least in this country, there's quite a bit in Sicily. The Santo Failla was his name. So he was away a lot. I really believe as a kid, I clearly didn't like that. And this is before the internet, So my conversations with my dad for half the year, because he'd be gone for 2 months, home for a month, gone for 2 months, was on those ship-to-shore radios, where it's, "Hi, Dad," over. "Hey," he called me Charles, that type of thing. And it is what it is. I never begrudged it because he was earning for the family and so on and so forth. But when he used to come home on his leaves, he was always trying to start a business. And I think that has to have something to do with this. And for me, it wasn't so much to have my own business, although that was definitely the passion, but it was really to control my time, to be able to dictate when I work, where I work. And that's always been a common theme for me. And really the best way to do that is to have your own business. Sure. But the other part I will tell you too, the advantage I had, and it's a gift, I think, to know what you want to do from a young age. right? Because when you know from a young age, then every single decision I made from being 8 or 9 to 10 or 15 to 20 or 25, every decision I made was moving me toward that ultimate goal of starting my own business. So then I fell into Wall Street, which was my second career. I was actually a fundraising consultant. I worked for a for-profit company that consulted to the Metropolitan Opera, the Wharton School of Business, Chicago Botanic Gardens, and all this. So I learned the language of fundraising early on. And I thought I was going to start my own fundraising company, right? Because I just wanted my own business. And you probably saw The Wolf of Wall Street, right? As we all have. And it was one of those moments that the scene where, I forget the character's name, but he was talking to Belfort, who was played by DiCaprio, in the diner or wherever they were. He was like, show me that check and I quit today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know that scene. And so a buddy of mine that I trained in the fundraising world, he left the fundraising world, went to Lehman Brothers, the infamous 55 Water Street. For those of you that will know 55 Water Street Lehman Brothers is the birthplace of cold calling.
Sure.
In a big way. And he just started making stupid money. And I was like, I trained you. I could probably do that. And then I went into the stock market, New York City, cold calling, cowboy, that type of thing. Not terribly dissimilar from the Wolf of Wall Street. And then I was like, this is it. This is where I can make my launch into my own business. Did that for 4 years. I was always a top producer. I was always a hard worker. And when those other guys that were producing at my level were buying their Ferraris and their Porsches and whatnot, I was banking the money. And once I had about $1 million in the bank, and this is 25 years ago when $1 million was kind of worth something, I quit and I launched my own firm-ish, as we know, as it was part of the Raymond James IBD channel. We all feel it's our firm, right? Until we want to do something that the mothership doesn't want you to do. Then they remind you real quick it's not your firm.
Right.
But it's pretty close.
Yeah.
And I did that for 20 years. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Worked hard. It's not like I don't want to work. I just want to work when I want to work, where I want to work from. And the IBD channel was great for that. And then 5 years ago, dropped my 7, dropped my 24, still use Raymond James and now Schwab as our custodian, and launched a real deal RIA. And finally, at the age of 49, I think it was, I finally had truly my own business.
Yeah. And it's funny, there's so many things that come to mind. I mean, first of all, 25 years ago when you started, I mean, the first advisor that I broke was a little over 25 years ago, but there wasn't really, there was a guy at a U.S. Trust who, like, when I say it was a breakaway, we didn't even call it. There was no breakaway movement. There was no RIA independent movement. There wasn't the ecosystem and infrastructure and that there was then. It was just, for me, it was a guy who was leaving U.S. Trust, wanted to set up his own business, right? And what's very satisfying is 2 years ago, we did an exit deal for him to Cerity Partners. So it was 23-year bookend, which is very cool. But back then, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't people who did it, like he did it. There are people who are even older than that. But like for the most part, the closest, there were many more advisors who were closest to owning their own business in an IBD channel back then than there were, hanging out a shingle.
Oh, for sure.
25 years ago, so.
Yep.
Very cool. It's funny. I remember those days. I was at it from a different, I talk about Water Street. I mean, I had an office down on Wall Street a few years early in my career after I left big law and medium-sized law and hung out a shingle, 6 years out of school. And we represented a lot of the guys on the floor in New York Stock Exchange. And, this mentality of buying Porsches for cash or Ferraris for cash, or, I remember they had the Super Bowl pool. They would put up 10 grand cash each per box.
Yeah, sure.
And it was $1 million, literally cash, $1 million cash pool. That was the mentality of these guys. So for you to have that foresight, right, when that was the culture, to save that money. And I guess part of it goes back to this idea that you knew from 8 or 9 years old that you wanted to be a business owner, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And again, it's a gift, right? You can't work at understanding what your passion is when you're 8 or 9 years old. Either you have that or you don't. And I was fortunate to have that. And I think part of that was by circumstances, as often is the case. But you're exactly right, because it was that I had that mindset that I singularly focused, laser focused on wanting my own business. I finally found a path, because even when I was a stockbroker, I knew of the IBD, and I was like, at some point when I get X dollars in the bank, I'm going for it. And that's the benefit of knowing what you want from an early age. And that's a gift. And that was a gift I was fortunate to have.
Love it. So I want to follow that journey a little further, and it was too interesting not to ask follow-up questions. But let me get back to what is usually my only other question I always ask, which is, what was your first deal of any type, looking back? Maybe it was something small when you were a kid, maybe it was something early in your career, anything you consider a deal.
A deal? Well, that's an interesting question. I want to give you a real accurate answer. I don't know, even to this point, if I've had a deal.
Uh-huh.
Right? I don't think I have, and it depends on how you're defining deals. And I guess that could be a pretty liberal interpretation, but I see deal as like a transaction that, if it's a good deal, I think, and I'll defer to you on this, but I think a good deal is 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2, but 1 and 1 equals 5 or something like this.
Yeah.
Definitely have not had that. The closest thing I've had is bringing on good people, right?
Yes.
But I don't know that that's a deal. But, it kind of brings me to our conversation here today. And I love getting free advice. As one of my favorite things about doing podcasts is like, all right, I get Corey's expertise for 45 minutes for free. I love this. I am finally looking for a deal, not a full exit, but, look, I'm 56. I love what I'm doing. I don't want to walk away, but being realistic, and, this was the year I realized I'm no longer a 35-year-old guy, right? So part of that is, okay, I can't smoke as many cigars as I normally did. I can't eat the way I have. I can't follow my teenage kids down those double blacks anymore. Over the past 4 years, I broke my leg twice.
Wow.
So 4 years ago, I broke my leg. 3 years ago, I fractured my leg. And then 2 years ago, I said, I got to stop doing it. So I'm begrudgingly accepting the fact that I'm no longer in my 30s. And part of that is I'm not going to work forever, certainly not at this pace. Yeah. So I am now finally giving some thought to what does that next chapter look like? And for me, it's not an exit, but it's a stepping aside and let some younger folks run the show, and I still participate in some way. And that's what I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, because, this being a Deals podcast, the topic that you and I discussed, and you have a strong view on in the industry, is this conversation of, when people think about deals in the RIA industry right now, the first place they go is these PE-backed aggregator, external sale, exit deals, only because they get most of the press, and it's a relatively new phenomenon. I'm not saying there wasn't any money in this space, whatever, but go back more than 5 or 7 years ago, and the volume of M&A and the amount of money in the space and that kind of stuff was a whole different thing. In fact, I've mentioned on this podcast, you only have to go back about 12 or 14 years ago when there was hardly any money. Like you could barely get lending capital in the space, right? Well, Live Oak and Oak Street and a bunch of these other folks came in. And you definitely have a view on, at least for your firm, and about this conversation about internal succession. And there are people in the industry who would say, well, previously internal succession was tough to get done because there was no capital. The objection you heard was that, well, not too many years back, the junior folks, the G2, couldn't finance the deal. So if the owner was going to self-finance, why would they sell? That was the knock on it, at least. Now there's definitely plenty of capital in the space. But of course, multiples have gone up so significantly on outside sales that some people would say, well, internal succession is dead because there's too many outside options. Now, we do both. Mm-hmm. We see plenty of both. Yep. Internal succession is not dead. But talk to me about sort of your view and philosophy on internal succession versus what might seem to be the tempting, multiples that PE-backed aggregators and integrators and serial acquirers are throwing around these days.
Yeah. Well, I think you said it right, which is I have strong feelings on what's right for me.
Yeah.
Right. So I do believe PE has a very meaningful role. And here's how I am looking at it. And again, what I'm hoping to get out of this podcast is your thoughts on this. But here's what I think. I think the PE solution is probably a good one where people are more done than not. At least that's my view, right? You want to get that final paycheck and egress out, right? You want to get out. I don't want to get out. I really don't. I love this business. I love my business. I truly love Sovereign, right? As a lot of entrepreneurs and founders, they have that real love for their business because they poured so much into it. And to equate it to a child is not completely wrong, right? It has that same sort of attributes, having raised 2 kids that are now in their late teens. So you're seeing, okay, it's working out so far, so good.
Right.
The same sort of feeling you get about a business, to a degree. So for me, I have at least another 20, 25 years if my health and everything permits. And there's no reason for me to think that's not the case. So I want to participate in more of the growth because we've launched some really cool initiatives. We're actually launching our first ever tender offer fund, registered investment company, like real deal, not some private fund, like a real deal tender offer fund, which I think is going to have its own incredible growth trajectory. And we're just going to start dropping tickets on that in a few weeks. So that's brand new. I want to be part of that, not just economically, but part of the excitement of seeing something else be born and grow. That really turns me on. I love that. And for me, I really think that sovereign is going to be worth a lot more in 10 or 15 years than it is today. So economically, selfishly, I want to participate in that growth. I don't want to sell that growth over to private equity. So for me, succession makes sense, internal succession, because I don't want to give that equity to, the way I see it at least, a PE firm. And now, for the first time in 30 years, I have a boss, is how I would see it, right? And I have to believe anyone that's giving you an 8-figure check, they're seeing themselves as your boss to some degree. And I don't think I would accept anything other than that, to some degree at least. So for me, I want that equity in the hands of our next-gen advisors, our next-gen staff, right? Our next-gen operations people, right? There's someone in particular right now that we're currently grooming to be COO, perhaps president, COO. And for me, I am committed, whoever's going to have that C-suite title has to own, right? Has to own, because I just believe you're not going to love sovereign the way I love sovereign unless you own it. And I get that, which is not to say I want to give out lottery tickets, right? You have to buy in, and I'll share with you what I'm leaning toward for my buyout structure. But I want that next gen to build and run it day to day with my personal goal, in the next 18, 24 months, that I'm doing just two things, right? I'm doing the conference circuit, and I know we'll talk about investment news and Go RIA. Love doing that. It's great exposure for my firm. I want to keep doing that for sure. And I want to keep servicing my business. I'm also an advisor, right? I run a book of business. I talk to clients every single day, right? So you hear a lot of firms out there like, built by and for advisors. Well, we are built by and run by an advisor for advisors. Like, we are really an advisor firm. And I want to go back to being an advisor and more in that sort of chairperson position, I guess, where I'm doing the strategic thinking, I'm doing the exposure raising. But I could tell you what, if I never have to have a conversation again about why an API is not working, that would be fine with me, So that's stuff I don't need to do anymore. But I do want to find the right people that will. And I want to go to bed at night knowing that whoever's at the helm running the operations day to day is going to do so with the level of care that I had. And I think that can only be done with equity.
Yeah, I love that conversation. It's a fascinating conversation because, listen, one of the great things about this industry is that there are so many, nowadays, is that there are so many options, so many models out there. In fact, the challenge is that people are confused about all the options, whereas it used to be there weren't a lot of options. Now there are so many, right? Which is a great thing in a lot of ways. And there's a flavor for everybody. And even with regard to, you and I both talked about how we're huge advocates for the independent space. But I'll be the first one to tell you that there are certain advisors who should never leave a wirehouse.
Yeah, I believe that's true.
Ever. Right.
That's true.
And it's not like, I don't want to make it sound like I'm being judgmental there. It's just, know thyself. And there are certain folks that should never be entrepreneurs, a lot of people, right? And, folks with the IBD model works well and whatever. And obviously there's differences in fiduciary and for the clients or whatever, but without getting into that, it's just that there are different flavors for different folks. But, this owner's mentality that you raise, right? It is a big thing. And there are some models out there that try to create incentives with things like, and we do them. And again, for the right situation, it works. Like with phantom equity or some sort of profit sharing plan or some other non-equity, non-true equity vehicle that creates maybe mirrored economic benefits, but isn't true ownership. And listen, there's some advantage to that. You don't have any fiduciary duties to minority owners. You don't have to get the equity back when they leave. It terminates this. We can go through all that. But for internal folks, like if you really want them to think like an owner, right, and feel like an owner and act like an owner, love, in your case, sovereign like an owner, it's hard to get them to do that if they're not an owner.
I completely agree. And that is something we thought about. We looked at the phantom equity and all this, and it certainly has some advantages for me, because I really am not giving up ownership ultimately. It's just a really, really wonderful incentive program for sure.
That's right.
But it's not equity. Equity is something you you give to your kids is what equity really is. And that's what energizes me as an equity owner. And it's that level of energy that I want to bestow onto our next gen leadership at Sovereign. And it's got to be, I think, I mean, we haven't signed anything yet, but we're, past the initial planning. So we're getting real serious about this now. But I'm thinking, you know what, if we're going to do this, let's do this. If I want someone to really have that same level of commitment, not on how good we can make these numbers this year, but how good we can keep those numbers 20 years from now, well, they got to know that they have a piece of that 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And I think that's done with equity. And if I expect that level of dedication, I think I need to be ready to give up the equity, the real equity. And that's what I'm leaning towards so far.
Yeah. And you know what? Like there's so many, I mean, listen, there's so much we can say about this industry. I mean, anybody in the industry knows, frankly, the industry in general has done a terrible job of bringing up a G2 and G3.
Yep.
And then in situations where firms have had them, there's a subset that's done a terrible job of properly rewarding, incentivizing, retaining folks. Listen, we've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of breakaways, and traditionally, obviously, they were out of wirehouses and private banks. And, that obviously continues and still is the biggest piece of it. But, and then IBDs. But, obviously, as the independent movement has matured so much, we have breakaways out of independent firms. And one set of those breakaways out of independent firms is often G2 folks who have not been adequately, rewarded for the contribution they make. And in some cases have been promised or indicated, and then it just never happens, right? And the founders won't give it up. And, that's a mistake that a lot of folks make that sounds like you can avoid, and because they lose that talent or they go to sell externally. And then the juniors are like, well, we're not, the G2s, we're not equitized, or I have 5% equity, but I control 30% of the book. No, I'm not going to go along with this sale deal where all of the capital gains proceeds are coming to you, senior guy, and I'm getting locked into some sort of employment agreement with restricted covenants, right? Yeah. So it's an issue in the industry that some folks are like you are smart enough to recognize, hey, we need to really take care of the people that we care about if we really want them to be vested and stay around.
Yeah, no, I think you have to. And especially if you want them to act like an owner. There's only one way to do that. You have to be an owner. And look, I don't care what the business is. When you're dealing with an owner, right? I've been in some, small little boutique shops, and I know I'm talking to an owner. Yeah. I know I am, right? There's no way that some hourly employee is going to service me the way this particular person is. I know you're an owner. That's what you need. And it only comes with, in my opinion, I think, real equity. And to your point, we're actually talking to an advisor right now that's about to leave that firm because she too was kind of promised the equity, and it's like soon, soon, soon. Meanwhile, 11 years later, soon never comes, right? So it's like that expression, mañana, mañana, but mañana never comes, right? It's never tomorrow. Because guess what? When you're at tomorrow is the next day. Tomorrow never comes. So I think the good people, and those are the ones that you want to keep, those are the ones that are going to connect those dots and be like, hey, you're not pulling the trigger, but you know what? This other firm is. And it's just like a talent bleed from your shop. And that's not what I want to see, right? I want to retain the best talent. It's taken us a while to find, right? Because as we've grown too, and this has been kind of an interesting dynamic. I mean, when I started Sovereign, the real RIA, as opposed to Sovereign, the DBA, which is nothing but a piece of paper, right? That's not a firm. It's a shell. It's a marketing piece, which is fine.
Yes.
We were, it was me and a junior advisor. We were running $110 million.
Yeah.
Very comfortable lifestyle practice. This was only less than a handful of years ago. And now we're scratching at $1 billion. We've got 17 advisors. And so what's interesting that I've noticed is our staffing needs for $1 billion shop is very different than a $100 million lifestyle practice. So that's been some growing pains for us, but we are really starting to finalize our real team, the leaders. And these are the folks I want to make sure are going to be around for a good long time. And they're the ones that are going to get the first crack at equity.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because there is this, I've had this conversation with a bunch of my advisor clients, RIA clients, and even doesn't only apply when there's a lawyer in the Entrepreneurs Organization Network. We have a subgroup of lawyers, entrepreneur lawyers who get together. And he always reminds me that I always tell him that, listen, it's easier to run a $1 or $2 million revenue firm or a $10 million revenue firm than it is a 5 or 6 or 7. Because what happens is you've gone through this already, gone from 100,
Sure.
10 or whatever it was to near $1 billion. And that's the range. When you get into that middle range, what happens is what worked for you as a lifestyle practice doesn't work anymore because you've scaled enough where everything can't be in Becky's head or in, or the way you do it, right? You need to start having systems and processes and non-producing executive or admin or operations kind of people, whatever. And then you got to find that talent. You got to figure out what's not working. You got to figure out how you create systems and scale and whatever. So that's the rough period. And that's also often a period where you become less profitable for a little while, right? Profitability goes up, and then you get to this point where you have to invest, whether it's technology, whether it's team, whether it's systems, whatever. You actually make less money for a little while because you're investing in advance of what will hopefully be future growth. And then when you get to where you are now, where you're approaching $1 billion again, okay, now you're on the other side of that, right? So it's a fascinating journey that a lot of, firms don't make. And maybe they're sitting at 300, 400, 500 million. And then they end up selling because they haven't been able to make that jump organically on their own, but you were able to.
Yeah, Corey, I can tell you clearly do this a lot because that's exactly what happened. So my take home has gone down substantially over the past 2 years. I was like, wait a second, we're $1 billion firm. Why am I not making more money? Right. But to your point, if you really want to become a $2 billion firm, you have to invest.
Yes.
The people that you need are more expensive. The systems that you need are more expensive. And so we did. And I was like, this is how we're gonna build this firm. Now, the good news is, and I think you're spot on, our next $1 billion is going to be highly profitable.
That's right.
Highly profitable. So we're super excited about that. But you do have to make
the incremental cost on that's going to be so much less because you already made the investment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, without question.
Love that. And are you also thinking about, obviously equity program for the internal folks in terms of attracting other advisors with books of business, whether that's through recruiting an equity program or an acquisition program? Is that part of thinking?
Yeah, that's the one I'm not sure about yet, right? I've heard of this idea of what was called equity swaps, like where you join us, you get equity, we take your book and all this. Yeah. Maybe, but I got to be honest with you, I think our initial need, as far as to equitize people to get in real ownership, I think it's more on operations.
Yeah.
I really think so. Because again, we act as a platform. So the advisors that join us today, they're using us as a platform. So they already own their book. Now we're at the ready to buy their book when they're ready to retire or, to be their succession plan. And I think we would be the obvious choice for that. And we would clearly pay the most top dollar for it because we know the book and we could pay top dollar for it and it's easy. So I'm also not in a big rush. So I think for me, the equity is going to most go to our staff, right? That I want to really develop into true leaders, true directors, true C-level people. And they'll be available to the advisors that want. But will we use it as a recruiting tool? I'm not sure yet, is the real honest answer. I still need to figure it out first. But I feel that it's, for the longevity of the firm, more important to get the staff set. And as long as you're making your advisors happy, which is oftentimes when we're having these leadership meetings, I was like, well, we got to be sure we're doing the right thing for our clients. I'm referring to the advisors.
Advisors, right, because that's your model. Right.
That's our model. Those are our clients. And if we take care of them, and we hear this all the time. I had the chance to do a podcast with Marty Bicknell over at Mariner.
Sure.
No surprise, he's got the same feelings, right? You take care of the staff, and the staff will take care of the advisors, and the advisors will, of course, take care of the clients. It's just how it works. So that's my main interest right now, is to make sure we have the infrastructure, which is, I think, more staff, because our advisors really are our clients. And if we have the right staff, we're going to have no problem getting more clients, which, again, are the advisors.
Yeah. And I comment on that, but just for our listeners as a side, so you can hear apparently Marty Bicknell on Chuck's podcast. You could also go back to a prior episode of DealQuest when I had 9 of the CEOs of the top, actually acquisition aggregator, integrator, serial acquirer firms on talking about their models. And Marty was one of them. And Marty's, obviously been, built a great firm in the industry and been around for a while and is happy to share his passion for his model. But going back to this conversation about, it's because this is another piece where people often make a mistake in that they're hesitant to give equity, period. If they're going to give equity, they automatically look at the quote unquote producers, right? Somebody's making me money. Oh, my ops person doesn't produce money directly, right? But again, in your model, where you're supporting advisors, it makes sense. But even in an operating RIA firm, where the model is less of a platform model and more of an operate, I think it's just underutilized. Like, just people, there's other value significant, especially if you want to grow to the level, you're looking right through $1 billion up to multiple billions. Those people, that executive team, that C-suite leadership team is absolutely crucial. And you're not going to get the top people. The top people want to have a stake in the game. They want to have, skin in the game.
Yeah.
They want to have,
and they should,
if they're really small, and they should. Yeah.
Yeah. If they're a top, operator, they should have that equity, because I think that's really key. And I kind of joke about this, like one of my biggest superpowers is not knowing what the hell I'm doing. Right. So for me, I literally never had a real job in my entire life. Just never did. I either reported to the owner of a small business, or I was the owner of a small business. So all these things like putting together KPIs and metrics and processes and workflows, I'm telling you, you would be hard pressed to find someone that would make fun of those concepts more than me 5 or 6 years ago.
Right.
I was like, I got it all right here, But now, as we're growing, I was like, boy, we really need some process here. We need some KPIs here. We need some metrics here. And so our most recent hire, which was a very legitimate head of operations, not someone who is dealing with operations and doing 5 other things, but truly a head of operations. And boy, he's been with us now just for under a month, and I'm already seeing the difference of things that a real operator does. And so the reason why I bring this up in the context is my first thought for giving equity was to staff. And then I talk to people at conferences, and they're always talking about, as you mentioned, giving it to the FAs. I was like, okay, I guess, but I think first we need to shore up the operations. And then, for the FAs that want to buy in, they're going to be welcome to, but we're not going to lead with that for recruiting. I think our platform is strong enough to stand on its own. If you want to buy in equity, we're going to have an opportunity for that. Because look, I had the patience to not take some deals even a couple of years ago with PE.
Yeah.
Which would have been pretty attractive even back then. So I'm fortunate to be sitting on 100% equity. I haven't sold one share. So I don't need 100% at this point, right? At this point, I'm very, very happy to trade some equity for some of my time back. That's where I am in my life. And there's plenty there to go around for operations and the right FAs as well.
Yeah, listen, I love that outlook. And it's funny, I won't spend a lot of time on this piece because I do want to get to your podcast and what you're doing, with that. But I've mentioned this a couple of times, but, we've done 350 episodes of this podcast, so it's been a while. But I mean, listen, first of all, Chuck, you're a classic visionary, right? Which is, how I am, right? And visionaries, we get, you create new stuff, you have a vision, you're the one who could start it up and whatever. And to any of these sort of categories, and there's a million versions of this, but, whether they call them executor, operator, or whatever, they're different strategic coach, whether it's predictable success, which is the one that I really like. They always have, it comes down to the same thing. Like, us visionaries need people to execute, right?
Without question.
Because we hate it and we stink at it, whatever. And I joke that thank God I have people that I empower who are willing to say to me in my organization, yeah, Corey, okay, great. We can do that. No, it won't get done in 2 weeks, and you got to put it in the priority list of the other 7 priorities you came up with that we should be doing. And by the way, you understand 6 of the 21 steps it takes to get that done. So, there are these other 15 steps, which you don't even want to know about, but they're there. So that's why it's, and that's the way it is. And then in this predictable success model, they say, okay, you have the visionary, then you have this operator or integrator, whatever you want to call them, the executor, the person who makes it happen. But when you're in that earlier stage, like, lifestyle business, the fun stage is what he calls it. Mm-hmm. That operator executor is the hero. Everything's in that person's, in his or her head. They just find a way to make it happen, but it's dependent upon them. And they also have the personality where they like being that go-to person. Yeah. Then when you expand to be able to get that knowledge out of them and create systems around it and put team around it, first of all, sometimes they resist that, right? Because it's going to feel like that makes them less important. But also, like, the system as a mentality is a different mentality than the visionary and the operator executor mentality. And you actually have to get to the point where all of those 3 different sort of energies work to get to a business that actually scales, where the visionary can do what they're great at. That's what you're talking about. Like, you want to,
without question,
all this execution operation stuff, right? Another API you mentioned. You want to do the visionary stuff. You want to have your executor operators do stuff, and you have your people coming in and systemizing so that you can scale. And that's I love those frameworks because it really applies to any business.
It really does. And I've come to really learn that a lot over the past couple of years, for sure. And again, I would be the first one to be like, oh, KPIs, this and that, but they are so important as you grow. And it's something that we have absolutely embraced at this point, and we're already seeing the benefits of it.
Love it. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to corykupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. All right, so let's talk about this Go RIA podcast and the relationship with investment news on that. Tell us more about what you're doing there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the full story is, I broke away about 5 years ago. Year one, we built a tech stack that was completely wrong. So year two, we dismantled that and built the next one, which is perfect. We love it. So that brings us to 3 years ago, give or take. So 3 years ago, we're like, okay, we are open for business. And what we set out to do, which I think is interesting, and I know a lot of folks in the advisory space talk about niches, but I think that also plays for firms. So we have a very, very well-defined niche, which is simply this. We want to be the RIA platform, not just for financial planning-oriented advisors, but more specifically than that, for the cash flow-based financial planning investment advisors. Very specifically, the ones that use eMoney, Right Capital, Orion Planning, and Naviplan. Those are the four big cash flow-based systems, not Money Guy Pro, right? So it's not a disparaging against Money Guy, just I like cash flow-based. So everything at Sovereign is built for what I think is the best way to run a business, which I think is do your cash flow analysis, and then everything else is done by what I used to call SOC. SOC is someone other than Chuck. Back when I was running my lifestyle practice. So all I love to do as a planner is the interaction with the clients, the developing of the plans, and there's nothing else I really want to do. So that was SOC's responsibility, someone other than Chuck. Yeah. So what Sovereign has evolved into is a firm that does that, where if you're an advisor like me that likes to use, I happen to be an eMoney fanatic, works well with the other cash flow-based systems that I mentioned. You do your cash flow analysis, and then you're done. Everything else is done by support or the trading team. We have an in-house TAMP that's designed specifically to dovetail. We're actually trademarking it. It's called TAMI, Time Horizon Asset Management Integration. It's literally designed to allow the advisor to take that 5-year cash flow report that all those systems have, essentially get that over to trading, and we trade off of that. Very cool, very efficient. So once we got our identity set, 3 years ago, I wanted to get the word out there, but I had a limited budget. So I said, let me try this content marketing thing I keep hearing about. Yeah. So independent, this is before Investment News was involved, I created GoRIA.com. And it was essentially a website that I created, and then also podcasts, and I did webinars, all on my personal Zoom, not knowing what the hell I was doing. But we had tremendous success as far as eyeballs, not because of my production value, I promise you, because it was, I call it like the Blair Witch thing. It was very low production value. But the content I think was good because it was sincere and authentic about my journey going RIA. It was almost like a reality show, but we got so many eyeballs. So that was 3 years ago. So a year into this, I approached some friends of mine over at Investment News. I said, look, here's what I'm doing with GoRIA.com, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Imagine if we were to partner together. And they were like, let's give that a shot. They liked the idea. So 2 years ago, it evolved into Go RIA, fueled by Investment News. And the way it works is I create the content. Every week I do a live stream, every 2 weeks a podcast. A few times a year I'll do a webinar. But what really has been hitting hard and in a good way is my coverage of conferences. It's called Go RIA and Location, where I go to T3 and FPA NorCal, FPA National, the Schwab Conference, Joel, you name it, I'm probably there covering it for Go RIA, rocket fuel. And that's been fantastic. And talk about a symbiotic relationship. So what do I get out of it? And I like to be transparent. One of my real peeves is disingenuousness. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really can't stand it. I really can't. And you have a lot of that in every industry. So in our industry, we have people like, oh, I do this because I want to save this and do this and help. Yeah, I think that's kind of table stakes, right? You shouldn't have any venture that doesn't provide value.
That's right.
Right? But I'm doing this because I want to get attention for me, right?
Sure.
Let me tell you something. Spoiler alert. You go to a conference, you see someone on stage, 99 out of 100, they're promoting something, and that's cool as long as they're delivering value. And I've always believed that if you want to get value, you better be prepared to first deliver value. So here was my thought with Go RIA. My intent was to help educate tens of thousands of advisors about the benefits of the RIA space, with the hope and expectation that dozens of those advisors came to Sovereign. And that's exactly what's happened, right? And, I was talking about this on another podcast recently, and I built my initial business, starting back 25 years ago, doing the seminar deals.
Yeah.
You send out 10,000 postcards. Those 10,000 postcards get about 50 people in a room for dinner. Right. Although I actually never did the dinner ones because I thought that was a mistake. I always did cocktails and a presentation, but that's a different story. But you get 50 people in a room.
Yes.
Of those 50 people, 10 will make an appointment.
Yes.
5 will show up. 2 or 3 become clients.
Yes.
Grind. But the ROI is fantastic on that.
Yes.
But there's so many advisors that try that. They're like, oh my God, I got to feed all these people. They're just a bunch of plate lickers. Who cares? Who cares if you feed 50 people, if you get 3 people, and each one of them more than pays for that seminar? Why not do that as often as you can? And that's exactly what I did. So I took that same thought with GoRIA.com, which is, I don't care if I educate of the 10,000 people, I might reach in a quarter. If 2 of them come to Sovereign, home run.
Yes.
Home run.
Yes.
And if 9,998 go somewhere else and felt that I helped, you're welcome. I'm happy to do that. As a matter of fact, one of my proudest moments as it relates to Go RIA, at least, was about 3 years ago. I was at a conference, and it's when I just started getting recognized at conferences, which is pretty cool. I'm not going to lie to you. It's nice.
Yeah.
And someone said, oh, you're the guy from Go RIA. I was like, why, yes, I am. And he was like, it was because of your show that I went independent. He didn't come to Sovereign. That's fine. But I felt so flattered that he was legitimately helped by the content we were doing. So that was great. And I love providing value. But again, at the end of the day, I do a lot of work for this. I'm doing this to get exposure for the firm. And I'm very happy to deliver value to 99.9% of the people that will never, ever talk to me. Because that 1/10 of 1% that does, I'm happy for it.
Listen, it's the same thing with this podcast. I mean, I'm very fortunate in that, I think it's true for you as well. Like, I love talking about deals, right? And I love talking to deal makers. So this is actually it's an hour of my week, right? And, and then we do like a 15-minute just pre-call. So let's call it an hour and 15, hour, 20 minutes a week for me. And it's one of my favorite things to do. So it's fun. And yes, do I get, when I get those kind of emails from people to say, oh, I really appreciate your content. It's made a difference to me. Even we get it from students now sometimes, whatever. It's, phenomenal. But ultimately, what does it do for me? It keeps me top of mind, right? Gives me a profile out there, authority marketing, as it's become known. And frankly, the other thing is, since you bring it up, the conversation of transparency, which I am as well, there's also, people underestimate the guest strategy in podcasts, right? You meet people, you build relationships with people that you either further relationships with people you knew, you give them an opportunity to showcase what's important to them. They're appreciative. You use that to meet new people. And sometimes things come out of those guest relationships as well. Is it more than a tiny percentage of all the guests you have on? No, but it's similar to what you said. Listen, if I get a referral of one deal from a guest, right, in a year, it's well worth it, right? And I have the advantage of loving doing, and like you said, I mean, everything you do should come value first anyway, no matter what you're doing. So I totally get it. And the other thing I want to point out before we start to wrap here is that, so one of the things we talk about on this podcast is that deals, we don't talk about sales or organic growth, but we also don't just talk about M&A and capital raising. You have a deal with investment news on the podcast.
Yeah, well, okay, there you go. That is a deal. Yes.
You do.
That's absolutely
that's a deal. There's something you're bringing to the table. They bring distribution and marketing. They get, value from it. You get value from it. That's a deal.
Okay. I've had a deal then. Essentially, I never thought of it that way, but yeah, that's for sure a deal, and a great one, because we both get a lot of value out of it. And that's the best type of deal.
And the reason I want to point that out is not just to joke with you that you have, done a deal in addition to what you're about to do in terms of equitizing your team. But one of the things, I have a talk that I do, cool, there's a deal for that. And my argument is that any kind of business frustration, challenge, issue, or miss or opportunity that you don't know how to take advantage of, there's a deal for that, right? Doesn't mean that you should do a deal. There are also organic ways to do it. But if you're having trouble hiring, yeah, you can go to recruiters, you can post on sites, you can give your employees incentives to refer their friends, whatever. But you could also acquire talent, or you can do what's called an acquire. Like, I won't go too far down that road, but the point is, it's another tool in the toolbox. And one of the key questions I often ask people is, whatever your objective is, who already has access to that market, that demographic, that geography, that whatever, that might be able to be a partner, or you can do some sort of deal with. This is the classic situation, right? You have good content and ideas and whatever that you want to get out, and a message about going independent. We know in part because some percentage of them will come to you. All right. And you could try to do that organically on your own and build it up and do SEO and do whatever. Or you can say, hey, investment news, right, already has access to that market of people that I want to get to, and what kind of deal can we put together? And even without thinking it, that is a deal. And that key question of who can help you get where you want to go. And, whether that's a strategic alliance or a joint venture or a marketing deal, or whether there's a revenue share or there's not, or there's just benefit each side gets. That mentality is something that I often talk about, that deal maker's mentality. And one of the questions, just ask is, who can help me get access to the markets that I want to get? And Investment News was certainly a great partner for you. And
yeah, no, without question. And it's interesting, I never thought about that as a deal, but I guess it is. Yeah. And it's been a wonderful one.
Awesome. So, Chuck, as we finish up here, before I ask you my final question, so where can people find out more about whether it's Sovereign, whether it's Go RIA, anything else you want them to know? Where should they go?
Sure. Well, the easy one is Go RIA, because it's simply goria.com. That's easy to get to. And for me, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm without question the most famous Chuck Failla on LinkedIn, which is kind of like saying you're the best wine of Idaho. There's not a whole lot of Chuck Faillas on LinkedIn, so it was a pretty easy thing to do. So probably the easiest thing, if you just Google my name, I come up very easily on Google, which is one of the benefits of having a name that no one can pronounce.
Right. Love it. Well, I get that. There aren't that many Corey Kupfers out there either, so I know what you're saying. Chuck, it's funny because some of the things you said earlier may go to this, but the final question on the podcast I always ask is about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world for people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and I haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
It's exactly that, to be honest with you. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier on. The freedom to not have missed. I did not miss too many Little League games, dance recitals. I was the dad that people thought was unemployed because I was there all the time. Right. And I was like, let me tell you something. I'm very overly employed. Right. But what that means to me is this. If I want to go see, my kid compete or do a show, that's cool. But that means I'm also working Sunday night. That's what they don't see. That's what they don't see at the club, right? Like, oh, geez, you're here a lot. Or, man, do you have a job? Like, I see you at every single game. I see you at every single school event. Oh, I got a job. I was like, I'm working Sunday night. Are you? So for me, it's the freedom to work where I want, how I want. And I think I even started off our conversation with that. And that really is it. So you see the background here that says, Sovereign is the blue screen on Zoom. Yep. In about 5 years, you're going to see that same thing. Except my microphone and my laptop is not going to be in Stamford, Connecticut, where it is now. It's going to be in Nice. It's going to be in London. It's going to be in Dubai. And I'll still work, more than my 40-hour week, but I'll be doing it where I want. And that's going to be the point where my kids are in college. My wife, who I'm blessed to have one that I really love, we've been together for 20 plus years, and we love each other's company, and we work together. And we're going to be working together on the road in 5 years. Now, not entirely. We're not going to turn into, a couple of gypsies. But the idea is, we'll take a month here.
A digital nomad, young folks' life, quite, but yeah.
Exactly. And that's what freedom is to me. Yeah. It's not to work, but it's to work on my own terms. And what gift it is to have been able to accomplish that.
Chuck, listen, I am so excited and impressed with it's the growth of Sovereign and, getting over that hump and getting towards, and I know you're going to go well past the $1 billion into multi-billion-dollar mark, and the success of Go RIA and your partnership with Investment News. And I appreciate having you on the podcast.
Corey, thank you very much. This has been a real highlight of my week for sure.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest. where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to kupferlaw.com. That's kupferlaw.com, and if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.